200 scientists with him. It was mainly just that he wanted to discover the secrets of ancient Egypt. And they cracked hieroglyphs. Champollion, who was his protege, he was also a Freemason. So I think the tragedy of those wars, French-British wars, is that, we should have been working properly to advance wisdom and learning, doing the Baconian thing, and not killing each other. It was a tragedy, which is why eventually Europe settled down and founded the European community where we can do science and travel and behave like normal people. So that's, anyway, later on in the late 19th century, the French Freemasons, the Grand Lodge of the Orient, made a decision, I've got mixed feelings about that decision, to allow people to join who wouldn't take the oath to the supreme God, architect of the universe. You could become an atheist Freemason. You might say, no, I don't believe in God, but I still want to join the lodge. And they made a decision to let them come in. Because by then, in late 19th century France, a lot of great thinkers, scientists, people like Poincaré, the mathematician, these were Pasteur, they weren't particularly religious, but they wanted to meet together and share wisdom and all that. So the French made a decision to remove that swearing of an oath to God. And the British and American lodges have kept it. So to this day, you can't join the Masons unless you swear an oath to the supreme architect of the universe in the British lodges, but in France you can. I sit in the middle on this debate. I'd love them to be able to get on and agree to differ. I don't know. I think we need to revisit what it means to be an atheist. And in fact, I've coined a word in the last couple of weeks to make the debate a bit more intelligent. I think there's two kinds of atheists. There's a polyatheist who denies all gods and says, I don't believe in any gods or goddesses. I'm a polyatheist, right? Now, I don't know how you can hold that position with integrity, because how can we possibly know of all the gods in the entire universe? If I'm a polyatheist and I say there's no gods anywhere, ever, what if we discover some planet 50,000 years from now when we can travel faster than light and there's gods living there? How can you know that's not the case? You can't, I don't think. So I think rather than being a polyatheist, one should be at least a skeptic, suspend judgment. And then, in addition to that, there's monoatheists. Monoatheists, which is the normal kind you meet, say, well, there's only one God, but I don't believe in it. And they say, well, I don't believe in the God of Christianity, I don't believe in the God of Islam. They're all going on about God, I don't believe in it, so therefore I'm an atheist. But again, I think monoatheism is intellectually lazy, because there isn't just one God, as the table points out. There's millions of gods, and different cultures and civilizations have believed in different ones. So I think monoatheism, to say, well, I don't believe in God. Okay, but what about this goddess, for instance? It has no nuance to be a monoatheist. And so I just think we need to make the debate more intellectually sophisticated. And I think if I could organise a conference of Freemasons from Britain and America and France and have those discussions, it would be very interesting. And talking of which, I just want to say that there is a conference coming up in Paris 2 weeks from now of intellectual historians of Freemasonry. I sort of count as an intellectual historian of Freemasonry. And they're meeting at the Grand Lodge of the Orient in Paris. It's an exciting conference. I offered to do a paper for them on the impact of Freemasonry on the birth of socialism, which is something I've studied in detail, and particularly Marxism, because like Marx and Engels knew Freemasons, were influenced by them, but I don't think they ever themselves joined a lodge. But their ideas are taken from Freemasonry to some extent. The idea of building a new society, constructing a decent world, all this stuff. So I've written about that, and I don't know if I'll give a talk there, but I might just go anyway to listen to the other professors. It will be interesting. And if anyone wants details, they can contact me. And then the third box, co-masonry, is a late 19th century, because most of this time there were only men allowed to be masons, only male people, because it was the patriarchal society. Women were just there for having children and doing the cooking and all that, in their minds, right? Even though they loved women and idolized women, they didn't see it was important to initiate them. Until the late 19th century, again in France, the women started saying, "Oi, what about us?" And there was one woman in particular in the Napoleonic period, Citoyenne Vérité, was a Freemason. And some of these women were intellectuals in their own right. And she founded a lodge of women Freemasons, and they were quite active in France. And actually it was her home that became the Élysée Palace, where the president now lives. When the president is in France, he gets to use the house, like 10 Downing Street, for the Prime Minister. And it was her home, interestingly enough. And I think there should be a movie made about her. She was a fascinating woman and a Freemason. So there's a history of women Freemasons in France. And they came out in about the late 1900s and demanded, the late 1800s and the early 1900s, demanding co-Freemasonry, which is men and women on equal terms. So the lodges would include men and women doing their rituals together. This became a thing, and there's a whole lineage. So that's the third box. It was influential among theosophists, particularly Madame Blavatsky's group, and I think Marie de Maine was the founder of co-Freemasonry. Leadbetter, the English theosophist, was a sponsor of it, and so on, and it's still flourishing to this day. I know several women Freemasons here in France, and I think good luck to them. They have every right equally as the men. And women have been guardians of these mysteries for millennia. Also, I'll just say that in India, which I've travelled to many times, the Theosophical Society was very influential, with women Freemasons, Annie Besant, and many others, Alice Bailey. These were famous theosophists who were supporters of Freemasonry, because they saw it as like a club for advancing ideas, which is what I think it is. Okay, any more details you can look in the book, which gives all more details, right? Any questions? Why did the Nazis hate them so much? Why did the Nazis hate Freemasonry so much? If what I'm saying is true, why did the extreme right hate them?
It's a book emissary story. There is harm, so we must find a name for it. I think it's the book emissary story. They are like
scapegoats.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before that was the Jews. Now it's the Freemasonry.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so it's a scapegoat for projecting our hatred onto.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, there may be some bad Freemasons.
Sadly, there are. Yes.
And okay, every part of the population
there's a percentage of bad people. Yeah. I think Freemasons probably are lower than others. There aren't that many bad ones. I've not met any, but sometimes they do go crazy. Like Guillotine in the French Revolution, he was a Freemason, the guy that invented the guillotine. But I don't think he himself was a bad guy. He thought he was helping people.
Yes,
quick and easy death.
And Catholics, they are lost because the power of the church is collapsing, so they say it's the Freemasons that they
Yeah, they're going to blame something.
yes.
Yeah. It's a bit like Trump saying, the vote was rigged, my trial, they're all evil. You know. Yes, so the myth of anti-Freemasonry is very old, and you're right, it was connected to the Ancien regime fighting back, saying we don't like them because they're new and avant-garde. So they created this myth, which then became embedded in the European right wing. And during the White Terror after the Revolution, when the new Catholics, after Napoleon lost Waterloo, the French monarchy came back, and they were quite extreme, and I think it was Charles the King. They did a lot of slaughtering of any radicals, Jacobins, Freemasons. Although, you know, thank God it didn't last very long, and actually I think several of those reactionary monarchs became Freemasons. This is the irony.
Yeah, and
it's a fascinating history.
yeah, and one more topic is then these people they have a secret life, a kind of secrets. So it opens for all phantasm.
Yes.
Because we don't know about them.
So we speculate they're all Satanists or
and
whatever.
what was very it looks like an utopia when you told that in the 17th century that spreads among Europe, and it looks like wow, there is something new coming for intellectual thinking.
Yeah, it's called science.
So
Newton was a Freemason as well.
so maybe one question I have, because I've heard in Africa, for example, there are some Freemasons.
Sure.
But it looks like it's only, it's not with an ideal, like you evoke, of building a new world, and it looks like it's only a way to be part of the club. So
well, I hope not. I think not. I hope not. You know.
Okay.
I can't comment on.
So thank you, but
I
would like to ask you about the worldwide spreading. For example, in India, are they present or not?
Yes. In India, it was very important because India is such a huge country with many religions, and so you could join the Masonic Lodge for the 200 years when the British ran the country. We call it the British Raj.
Okay.
And whether you were a Hindu, a Muslim, a Sikh, a Buddhist, a Christian, a Jew, it was a meeting place for them all. And in India, it was incredibly important as like a cement for the society. And that's also true in Europe, because Freemasonry was one of the few places where you could meet if you're Jewish, or Christian, or Protestant, or Catholic, or whatever, a free thinker or whatever. So it brought everybody together and gave them a sense of, well, we belong together, we're people, you know. So humanism, the idea that I have human rights, this all grew out of these Masonic lodges. And the reason the extreme right didn't like it is because of their anti-Semitism. They hated the Jews because they're all evil, they don't accept Christ, you know. And so because the Jews were often in the Masonic lodges, they said, oh, the Masons are evil. They're talking to Jews. Okay. So Hitler, who was extremely anti-Semitic, and Franco, who was the same in Spain, and Mussolini, these fascists, whenever they got into power, they shut the Masonic lodges down and they persecuted them. So when Hitler's armies invaded Europe in Czechoslovakia, they attacked the Masonic lodges and closed them. They arrested Masons and they put them in concentration camps, like Jews, and they killed them. And the same in Paris, in France, when the Nazis invaded France here, they went to the Grand Lodge and they got all the archives, the papers, and they took them back to Germany. They had a special lodge centre in the SS for research into Freemasonry. And they got all the name lists and they sent people to arrest them all, everywhere they controlled in France and elsewhere in Europe. And thousands of them perished in the camps as Freemasons. That's all they'd done. Right?
It's not well known in France. It's not well known in France, this story.
I don't know why not. I mean, okay, it's quite obscure, and I just happen to know this history because I've researched it as a historian. It deserves to be better known.
Yes.
Because it's wrong what the Nazis did, you know. I mean, every year we see the mayor go up the street with the flag and plant it on the war memorial and stuff. But people should know what actually that war was about, and why the French resisted the Nazi invasion, and the resistance fighters. They did know this, I think. I mean, some of the Masons joined the resistance and fought back, and that history should be told. There's a lodge of Freemasons active in Limoges today. They know this history, and I'm sure there are historians there that would have researched all this. And I know for a fact, this is interesting, the founder of fractal theory, a great mathematician, Mandelbrot,
yes.
he was sheltered in La Creuse by a Jewish family, because he was Jewish, and then later he went to America. He escaped. He wasn't killed in the war. He escaped to America, worked for MIT, and discovered fractals. And so there were great minds being killed off by the Nazis. To me, it's an example of what I call Sophiaphobia. When people don't understand something, they're afraid of it, so they want to kill it. It's wisdom. So instead of trying to learn it, because it's quite difficult, they just shoot them. You know, I think, wasn't it Goebbels or someone said, if you ever meet an intellectual, don't listen to them, just shoot them. You know, that sums up what the Nazis do. And nowadays they're back. People like Steve Bannon, Nigel Farage, the people that did Brexit. This was a Nazi-type anti-wisdom movement, which has to be opposed. And it was supported by the hard right internationally. So the war carries on, my friends. Wisdom is still fighting her corner against the dark forces. Okay, shall we move on? That was a good one. Thanks for sharing that idea. I just want to briefly, I won't go into huge detail, on political philosophy, number 168. Yes, it's a really important tradition. I studied political philosophy and history of ideas at the University of London as part of my training as a historian, with a wonderful Hungarian intellectual called Laszlo Petter at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies, who taught me in detail. We had to read all the classic texts like Plato, Aristotle, Machiavelli, Montesquieu, Hegel, Marx. We came together every week discussing the details of their thoughts. And, you know, what do they say about justice or law? Rousseau was another. I used to love those classes, and I still do. And he was a genius who had fled from the Marxist clampdown on the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. He was a liberal who, I mean, he's a socialist, but he didn't want Stalinism in Hungary. He wanted free socialism, voluntarily. So he came to the University of London and taught political philosophy to me and others. And
165.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I greatly respect the Greeks, and I think, I mean, Plato is one of the founders of political philosophy, in that his book, The Laws, and others, The Republic, you know, it's a classic text of what should society be like. That's where I think political philosophy starts. It asks, okay, things are as they are. You know, we look around the world and we see chaos in Russia, chaos in Haiti, chaos in Nouvelle Caledonia, chaos in Brexit Britain. How can it be better? What can we do differently? And that's the job of the philosopher, is to think up, I think, a better system. To me, I mean, Aristotle, who was his student, came along and said there are three types of political theories. Aristotle had a very systematic mind. He codified everything. He said there's either monarchies, where one person makes the decisions, that's a monarchy. There's aristocracies, where a small group make the decisions, like an elite group, or there's democracies, where the mass of the people all say and vote. Aristotle classified these three types of governments, and they all have their good points and their bad points. And still that threefold classification is still, I think, valid. It's what Aristotle came to the view of in the end is that the ideal constitution is a mixture of all three. You need someone in charge who makes the final decisions. In France, we call them the president, you know. But you also need an aristocracy of people that are best able to govern, the most intelligent, the most wise, ultimately. But you also need a democracy where everybody gets a say. And they should all check each other. The problem with democracy is it's very easy to persuade the mob. It was the same in those days, you know. And the mob is fickle. You give them extra food and give them entertainments and gladiator shows, they'll do anything. So you need the aristocracy of trained minds to give gravitas to that. That's the theory. But then the trouble with aristocracy is they can become a self-serving plutocratic elite of billionaires. And we've seen that in the modern world. You know, who you don't get to join that club unless you go to the World Economic Forum, you know, and you have to be at least a millionaire, if not a billionaire, to get there. Well, that's today's aristocrats. And then there's the, you know, there's a problem with that because they can become corrupt. And the same with monarchs, they can become too fanatical and too, you know, like Caesar, they can seize power and control everyone. And many of these Roman emperors went crazy, like Caligula and Nero. That's the problem with monarchs. British historian Lord Acton said power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's a famous phrase. So other sources, we had Chanakya in India, and who wrote treatises on political philosophy. In China, Confucius was a sort of political philosopher who believed in harmony in society. If we follow the inner laws of the Tao, harmony prevails. You know, in America, Daganoweda, the great sage of the Iroquois and Huron people, founded the kind of North American Indian peace federal structure, which still survives, whereby they agreed to a council making decisions for all the tribes. It was like an early version of the United Nations, which I think is important. And Muhammad, in his own way, was a political philosopher. In his last sermon, he told his disciples, students, friends, to be kind to each other, to not, use violence, to not be racist, to accept. You don't have to be an Arab to be a Muslim. You could be any race. You should be treated equally, not to be cruel, and so on. He laid down certain laws, which not all Muslims have always followed, sadly. So I think it's really interesting. I mean, Jesus, did he leave a political philosophy? He didn't live long enough to really write it down. We don't know what he was teaching. He taught universal love and compassion. This idea of the kingdom of God, what did that actually mean in real terms, you know? I think what he was saying is that our political structures should be guided by our moral understanding and our spiritual insight. I think Christ was what we would call an idealist, philosophically. He believed in a higher realm of angels and the divine, and that is ultimately the only really enduring one. And our structures here, political parties come and go, governments come and go, even nations come and go. But the kingdom of God endures forever would be his position. And therefore, and to get entrance into the kingdom of God, we have to adopt, the law of love. And I think he thought that his teachings would spread and the peace would come to the planet. I don't think he thought he'd get such a big opposition as he's got. I don't think he foresaw his crucifixion. I think that was a bit of a blow. I don't go along with the idea that he offered himself as a willing sacrifice. I think that's a post hoc interpretation. He wanted to improve humanity through teaching as a rabbi and through inspiration. And the odd miracle helped. And I think the church ever since then has taken that message to try and improve humanity by bringing knowledge to mankind. So, as an academic myself, I'm a follower of that church, that authentic teaching, which is why we founded universities in Paris and Oxford. The church believed it had a teaching mission to improve the condition of mankind, And I still follow that myself. That's why I bother teaching. I just wish that more teachers took on board that spiritual dimension of education. It's not just about technique. It's about moral improvement, So that's why I specialise in ethics and moral philosophy, and why I think that's the table. If this was in all schools worldwide, and people learned about all the details like they do about physics and chemistry, we would be much less inclined to bomb each other and torture each other. And to me, that's true political philosophy, because it's about building a republic, as Plato called it, which is worth living in for us human beings. I don't want my children's children to live in a world of war and hunger, because where there's war, there's hunger and there's, poverty and starvation, and that's wrong. So the work of the United Nations is another thing I did this week. Is I hosted my World Intellectual Wisdom Forum meeting, which took place on the 31st of May, and we heard from people from all over the world discussing these kind of issues. And the UN has just had a big conference in Kenya about this, and it's coming up to a World Summit for the Future in September. And what we're trying to do with the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum is help the UN and other bodies think through a better world. It's an idealistic, applied philosophy, in a sense, because selfish politicians, kind of Trump and Bannon and the fascist Tory party that have created Brexit, they're destroying what previous generations built up. It took a lot of work for the European Union to be built up, for trust to be built by good people. And these people come along and smash it all down, just as Putin has tried to smash down what Ukraine was building up. So anyway, that's what we're trying to do, advising the UN with practical ways of improving problems of poverty, hunger, famine, conflict, war, climate change, etc. So that to me is the new politics, which is the green politics. I mean, I've always supported the green parties and the green movement. I went to Les Verts once in France to a conference. I think we have to now have a planetary politics that cares for the whole planet, for all of nature. But we need to also keep, very important, the human rights dimension of the liberal tradition and the humane socialist tradition of Gorbachev and people who wanted to end totalitarianism but keep the advances of socialism. When I was in Moscow and Gorbachev was president, that's when I was elected coordinator of Philosophers of Peace, I think, and he has set up the Green Cross. He was an ecologist, activist, old Gorbachev, and I agree with that. We have to save this planet from ignorance, and that has huge real-world implications for ecology. If we don't get wise quicker, we have to up the intelligence quotient of humanity morally and stop these wars. You know, we're going to destroy the whole planet's ecosystem. And that's what I don't want to happen on my watch, because I'm here as a visiting philosopher from the heaven worlds. And, yeah. Okay. Il y a des questions, des commentaires. Ça suffit pour la politique. Is that, I think it's just a summary. You know, I can't say everything. But thank you for listening. Okay, what time is it? I think we'll stop there, because I'll read a poem to finish. Is that all right? I don't think there's time for a god to appear in the tarots. We've invoked the gods enough, I think. Is that all right? But we have time for a little poem, because poems are always good. Yes.
If you find one poem about maybe one idea of building, you see, we want to build a better society as a Freemason, build a cathedral, or build a political system.
Okay, so a poem about building. Okay. Yeah, I think I've sneaked that image in a few places. See what I can find here. Huh. No. Huh. Huh. Yes. So this is a short and complex poem of mine, written quite early. I was a prodigy as a poet. When I was 14, I was writing poems like this. And I thought I was going to die early, at 18, like Rambo or someone, and just be a poet. I lived on and I became a philosopher and a historian, but deep down I'm just an adolescent poet. I think I wrote some good poetry in those days. And this one is really interesting. It's called Poet Objective. I wrote this in 1973. And in those days I was a young poet. I used to go to Paris for Easter holidays and wander around the streets reading French poetry. And I decided poetry is the only thing that tells the truth. Okay, with much effort, he held it up, this clear lucidity, effortless, and gazed. I seek an apex, as at noon, a point of clarity, an object raised. The clear lucidity escaped him. Nonetheless, he held it up and gazed. With much effort, I will make you real. I have searched in many places for the object of my praise. Summer became winter. The object tired. Across the desert's back, a camel moved and grazed. So, voila. It's a complex poem, and I don't know if you follow the English. Vous avez compris le sens?
The last sentence is what happened to the camels? He grazed. What does it mean?
Eating.